What was the one race that stands out in your mind more than any other one?
Well, there's two races that are really great in my mind. But the actual number one race is 1975, Ontario, California. That was the World Finals and Super Nationals.
That works better.
World Finals and Super Nationals in 1975. And 1975 was the first year of the Winston World Championships for NHRA, where they were going to pay a lot of money at the end of the year to the world champion. But there was three associations then. There was the IHRA, the AHRA, and the NHRA, and they all were pretty strong. It wasn't like it is now, it's just a one-man show. And Gary Beck and I were both under contract to run the IHRA circuit, and then I ran the AHRA circuit and the NHRA circuit. But the NHRA was mad at me because in 1972, I put on a race in Tulsa, Oklahoma, called the PRO race, Professional Racers Association, on the same dates as Indianapolis. And we had a really great show, and you could have shot a cannon up through the stands at Indianapolis. And we really hurt them that year, and they never forgot that. We didn't do it again because the sponsors have a lot to do with drag racing, and they came to me and they said, we don't want the Indy Nationals hurt. We like that race. Would you please take the race to another date? So we did. But Wally Parks never forgot that. So anyway, they did not want me winning the first world championships that they were producing. So the first thing they did to me was they took 200 points away from me for one of the races that I had attended in Fremont, California. Because what happened, it was a 16-car show, but in the semifinals, there was nobody appeared to race against me, and nobody appeared to race against Jerry Ruth. So there was only 2 cars left. It was at 12 o'clock at night because there had been explosions and track cleanups, and the race had been delayed. And so the event director, Bernie Partridge, who had the authority to do this, said, if you just race each other, we will consider this a 16-car show and you'll get your full points. What we should have done was each made a little burp off the line and come back and refueled and made the run, and then we would have had it. But I got the points. They put them in National Dragster, and 2 months later, they took them away from me because I won the race. So that was the first thing that happened. Then, the World Finals for the IHRA was in Bristol, Tennessee. And so NHRA put a Fall Nationals, this was their first Fall Nationals in Spokane, Washington. They put that on top of the IHRA Finals. And the IHRA rules was if you did not attend the race, no matter how many points you had, they were taken away, and the next person who had the next best points was the world champion. In other words, they demanded that you attend that final race if you were in the championship, where both Beck and I were neck and neck. And Beck elected to not attend the race, which automatically made me the world champion for IHRA. And he went out to the Fall Nationals and won the race because the biggest portion of the cars were at the IHRA race. See, the small group of Top Fuel cars followed the money. So Beck went out to Seattle and ran against a mediocre field of cars and won handily, and came into the World Finals at Ontario, California, 425 points ahead of me. Virtually impossible for me to win the championship. I would have had to set low ET and it stand as a world record when the event was over, top speed of the meet and world record when the event was over, and win the race. They were already interviewing Gary Beck as the world champion on the Los Angeles Times because they knew there was no way I was going to be able to do that because everybody had hit this stop. There was 249.3 miles per hour, and you just couldn't seem to go any faster. Nobody could get it through that 250 mile an hour barrier for some reason. So I worked with Goodyear Tire and Rubber. I put Goodyear Tire and Rubber into drag racing. I'm the guy that went to them and said, you need to get into drag racing and I'll work with you. Today, I cannot buy a Goodyear tire. If I need a Goodyear tire, I just call the factory and they send me whatever I need. And they've never forgot that. Anyway, they at Indianapolis in 1975, we were sorting through the tires and measuring the tires. I worked right with engineering on them, and I measured every tire, and I was watching everything because it was real critical what the tires was. And we came across a pair of tires that were 1 inch bigger. Somehow or other, they'd come out of the mold and something happened. We had a pair of tires that was 1 inch bigger than anything that was being produced at the time. And I said, give me those tires. And I took those tires to Seffner and I mounted them on a set of rims and I blew them up, overinflated them, which stretched them even more. And they sat on those rims until Ontario, and I carried them to Ontario with me. So it's like putting a taller gear in the car. Then I built this special motor because I knew that if I put a taller gear in the car, I'd better have more power. So I built this special motor that wasn't a really what you'd call a motor for long life. This was a one race motor, like they build today, a one round motor, but this was a one race motor, unheard of in those days. I would use the same engine for 2 or 3 months with just taking it apart, putting rings in it and stuff like that, unheard of today. So anyway, this is what I went to California with a pickup truck, with a camper body, and a twin axle tag-along trailer. That's what I showed up with Ontario. So we went out there on Friday, and I went 5.71 seconds, 249.3 miles an hour. It was top speed of the meet, but Gary Beck had went 569 and had backed it up with a 571. So now Gary Beck had a world record if he could hold it through the end. So it was looking like I was in real trouble. So we went back to the motel. It was this little terrible motel in Montclair that we all stayed at. It was just a dump, but it was nice, a big parking lot. And the guy didn't mind if you run extension cords out of the room and wash the parts in the bathtub, you know. It was really a different world. And I told my wife on the way out of the track, I said, the stage is set. I said, we have the 249.3 backup, and we have a 5.71 backup. We can set both ends of the world record and hopefully win this race and win the championship. So that night we pulled out the standard old reliable motor and put the more powerful motor in and put the big tires on the car. Went out to the track the next morning, it was pouring down rain. And it rained and rained and rained. And all of a sudden I got this feeling this rain's gonna blow out of here. So we strung a little half tent off of the trailer and got the car out of the trailer, got it started. Those days everything had to be push started. There was no starters yet. Push started in the pits, got it running. It was really sounding good. And sure enough, the sun came right out. So then we pull up to the staging lanes, and what the guys were doing, the whole drag racing fraternity knew what NHRA was doing to me. So they were really on my side. I mean, big, tough racers, we would go to the line and we would flip coins for the lane choice in those days. And they would say, we know what they're trying to do to you, Big Daddy. Just take any lane you want. Tell us what lane you want. And so I pulled up there to this one guy, and they had just had a bad melt of oil down in the left-hand lane. And the guy that I was going to race against wasn't in the show yet. And he says, Don, I'd really love to give you the good lane, but he says, you're in the show, and I'm not. He says, I need the good lane. I got to have it. He had won the toss. I said, understand. So we fired the cars up, and I make my burnout, and I look down at that track, and it's just solid white where they put that rice ash down. And I back up, and I don't see the other car. And he broke on the rollers. They had roller starters there. The engine blew up on the rollers. So there's nobody in the good lane. So I motioned to Buster Couch, I want to go over to the right lane. So Buster Couch calls the tower event director, and they said, no, he's got to run in the rice ash. And so I pulled up to the line, and I looked down, and it was all the way, the guy had blown up right on the line and just carried it out. And I looked down at all that white stuff under me, and I says, God, I don't want to tear up this motor, but I've got to have a start on it. What I'll do, I'll just make a nice, easy start. And of course, this engine is building heat all this time because there's a lot of time going on. And I said, I'll really be careful about this thing. And the minute I feel it, the least bit of acceleration fall off, I'll lift. And so I pull up there and I stage and I step down on that thing, and I'm going to tell you folks, it was the ride of my life. The front end came up about 6 or 8 inches on the step down. And that car launched like I'd never seen it launch before, and it just held those front wheels in the air, about 8-10 inches off the ground. And down it went, and I kept wanting the wheels to come down. Come on down. I was afraid to hit the shift button for fear it would blow over. And finally it got up to about 9,000 RPM, and I said, I've got to shift this thing because I can't go any further in low gear. And I hit the button, and it settled down, and smoke came off both front wheels. It was just like it was a plane landing. And that thing went down. They didn't have to tell me it went 250 miles an hour. I knew it went 200, and it did. And that 250 mile an hour record, I took that motor out. I won the race, by the way. So I had, and also went 5.63 seconds, and that was too quick, so that wasn't backed up by the 571. So I needed another good run down in the 560s to get the record for that part. But anyway, the next day in the actual race, I lined up in the first round against the Kentucky Moonshiners. Anybody here remember that team? That was a good, tough team out of Kentucky. Dale Funk was the driver, big, tough guy. He's still alive. I see him all the time. And Robert Frakes was the tuner. He's dead. Dale Funk, we're lined up now. It's we're fixing to race each other. And Dale Funk says to me, he comes over to the car, he says, Big Daddy, what you want us to do? I said, what are you talking about? He says, we want you to win the race. You want us to lose fire on the rollers, or you want us to red light, or just shut it off? Or what do you want us to do? I said, Dale, I don't know what you've ever heard about me, but I never threw a race. Let the best car win. And the man started crying. His tears run down his face. And he said, Big Daddy, he says, that's why you're my hero. Robert, he hollered over at Robert, put the nitro in it. The old man wants to race. And we raced, I'll tell you, we raced. I ran 5.65 seconds, and he went 5.68 seconds. It was the fastest side-by-side in the history of the sport. And then the next round, Herm Peterson beat Gary Beck. And the moment he beat Gary Beck, I was the world champion. And I'll tell you, it was a race that I'll never forget because they just couldn't hardly stand it. I won the first race no matter, but I'll go to my grave believing that the Lord was looking out for me because they was pulling shenanigans and doing stuff like that. And I never did anything funny, never cheated on any of the stuff. And I just ended up being the world champion. And the record, the ET and the speed stood for 7 years. It's written right on the wall behind the car. And that car that's in that booth has never been touched. It's not been restored. It's not been anything. It's just exactly the way it was, with the exception it don't have that trick motor in it. Because I come back this afternoon and took that motor right out because it was hurt real bad, and I put a tarp over it under my bench, and nobody ever saw what was in that. But it took them 7 years to figure out that it had high compression and a couple other little tricks in there.